I forget, practicals. This church has supported us for many years. If you're new here, you're like, this is cool, but who is this guy up there? This church has been behind and beside our family through support and prayer. And so on behalf of my family, we just wanted to extend a thank you. It's been almost 3 years since I've been back, and so it's cool to see some familiar faces and then meet some new people. And so we know that this work is a collective work. It's not Sean, it's not Megan doing the work. Like, we're all in this and have a role to play because God is for people. He's for these kids like Buzayu. He's for them knowing that they're loved. He's for you knowing that you're loved. I'll get into that. Also, if you're interested, no compulsion, nothing. If you'd like to pray, there's a few kids. If you'd like to pray for some of the kids specifically, there's bookmarks on the back table out there. And if you want to just pop them in your Bible or put them on your fridge and just remember to pray, because as a father, it means a ton more than when I didn't have kids. And what I mean by that is I would love, when I get on the other side, knowing like handful of people all over the world were praying for my kids' salvation, for their protection, for them to walk in the fullness, right? As parents, we want our kids to follow Jesus, but we also realize that as much as we want to, we can't control them and force them to follow. But we can influence and love on them in various ways. And so the way you can extend love to these kids is if you have a heart. There's different ones. This isn't all the kids, but you just put one in your Bible and just remember to pray for them. That would be amazing. This morning, I've just been thinking about how God is shaping and He's writing all of our stories. Some of you realize that. You've been walking with the Lord for some time. And for some of you, you're like, I don't even know what that means. This is my first time in a church. But God is writing a story. And He deeply is into His people. He deeply loves. And in each of our stories, our narrative is written. Some of you guys that are younger, some of you that are older, our past narrative was kind of, especially when we were young, was written for us by those that had influence and can shape things for the good. And some of you guys had negative influences that wrote your narrative early on. And then those narratives continue. And just like you would with the book, there's different chapters. There's different seasons. Not every chapter is the same as the previous one. God's not into just keeping it like this, right? As all of us can attest to in this room, no matter how long, or even if you haven't walked with the Lord, but no matter how long you have walked with Him, if you are, we can experience this, right? Up and down and up and down. There's two things that are common the longer I walk with Jesus, is that everyone in this world is suffering. Everyone in this world has suffered, and we have that common thread of needing something, needing hope to get us out of that suffering. You might say, well, I'm presently not suffering. I'm actually doing great, Sean. Well, that's good. But that doesn't mean you haven't in the past and that you won't in the future. And so there's certain chapters, and those things shape us. And my chapter is being written, my family's chapter is being written, as much as your chapter is. And I don't know all the details of the chapter. I don't know all the commas and the periods and the colons and all of those things of what's going on in your life. But part of why I believe the Lord brought you here is so that you can be reminded that He knows. He knows if you're down here or He knows if you're up here. He knows everything about you. He knows everything about your future. And so what we get glimpses of in the Bible can sometimes feel super impersonal. Like, yeah, that was good for those people over there. Like, God did miracles back then for those people. But what's He going to do today? And so I want you to turn to Mark chapter 6. I would like you to turn to Mark chapter 6. And that's where we're going to be camped out today. But here we're going to get a glimpse of a chapter in the disciples' story in their walk. as you're turning there, I want to remind you of a little bit of something about the dynamics that we read about in the Gospels of those who are around Jesus. Okay? You had those that opposed him, the ones who would seek to find fault in him or even to see him destroyed. They would follow at a distance, never even opening themselves to the Lord as he was on this earth, but they would follow as in opposition to what Jesus was doing. Then you would have the multitudes, which make up most. They follow for a season when things are good. They like the benefits of what God provides, the blessings. But then it's like, okay, Lord, I'm going to go now back to my deal. And then you have the disciples. And that's really the commission, right? That is the commission. When Jesus ascended into heaven, he said to go and make disciples. But how does that really happen? And how did the disciples get to the place of actually really being disciples? Well, a lot of it was hard. A lot of it was experience him as being more than what they expected him to be. And that's kind of the text in the chapter that we're going to look at right now. Okay, Mark chapter 6, verses 45 to 52. This has been a passage that has both encouraged me and greatly convicted me in the present chapter that I'm in and that my family's in. It says there, Mark 6, verse 45, beginning verse 45, it says, "Immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he sent the multitude away. And when he had sent them away, he departed to the mountain to pray. Now when evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land." Verse 48, "Then he saw them straining at rowing, for the wind was against them. Now about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea, and he would have passed them by. And when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed it was a ghost, and they cried out, for they all saw him and were troubled. But immediately he talked with them and said to them, 'Be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid.' Then he went up into the boat to them, and the wind ceased. And they were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure and marveled, for they had not understood about the loaves, because their heart was hardened." Now, a little bit of context, because it's really important, is in any story, reading like the middle of the book of the chapter of a story isn't going to give you the full glimpse, right? So we need to kind of set the background real quick. What just had happened earlier in Mark 6 is that Jesus miraculously, using the disciples, fed 5,000 plus people with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, okay? Not fishes, fishes. And when he did that, we need to understand that this chapter for the disciples, you might title it "A Really Long Day." Because they had been with those multitudes. They had been with Jesus. And like any good disciple, they said, "Jesus, they're probably hungry. It's a good idea to send them away so they can just get some grub," right? Send them away, let them get some food, maybe they can come back tomorrow. And what does Jesus say to them? You give them something to eat. Okay, Lord, but we don't have much. We have this and we have this, and the Lord blessed it and broke it, and a miraculous thing happened. And as they set the groups up, those 5,000 plus, now imagine that endeavor. With not a lot of planning, we're going to set up 5,000 people in groups. That's enough in and of itself. But then distributing to those groups. And every time they would put their hand in the basket, there would be more. And it's kind of like, I mean, at the end, you're kind of, in the beginning, it's smiling, right? 5,000 people, God bless you. God bless you. Towards the end, you're just like throwing it out there, right? Like, so you would imagine there, and we could do this as a narrative, to put our feet in the disciples' sandals in this narrative of just being tired. And then, on top of it, Jesus says, okay, after all this is done, amazing miracle, thank you for being a part. I'd like you guys to collect all the fragments. So they collected the fragments, and there was 12 baskets full of fragments. And how many disciples were there? 12. So each of them had their own to-go basket of fragments, right? Awesome. Okay, day over, let's check out. Jesus says, I'm going to handle the multitude, you guys go. I'm going to send you, and that's where we're at now. So he sends them away, and that's really important for us to start off with. Because as we seek to follow the Lord, as we seek to obey him, okay, we kind of expect it to be a little bit easy. It's true that sometimes as we obey, there is a sweet, instant blessing, and it's super smooth. And we're like, yes, this is awesome. But then sometimes when we obey, it doesn't necessarily go according to plan. And we struggle. And we're like, Lord, I'm just doing what you called us to do. And this really resonated with us in our season. Some of you guys may know. Some of you guys have prayed. I had some people from First Service even came up. That we entered into an adoption process of 2 of the children at Ebenezer. And it took about 2.5 years, 963 days, but who's counting? And there were so many no's along the way. Now again, similar to our story here, Jesus had sent them. We know God's kind of into adoption, right? It's kind of his thing. Like he set the precedent. He's kind of into orphan care. And he's behind this. We believed personally that he was calling us into it. But I had no idea what was awaiting us and all of the process in between. See, we like the checking of the box, but not the process. And the Lord is still working in the process, right? And he's still working in his disciples here, and he's still working in this disciple here in the midst of the process. And not, as we read in the story, not because their faith is so great, and that they're such awesome people, but because he's faithful. And that would be true even if the adoption did not go through for us. But thankfully, it did. My kids are in kids ministry right now. They're eating like their first In-N-Out burgers for the first time and going to Target for the first time. No, and so it's pretty amazing to think back. But I remember in the season, and I remember someone coming up to us and saying, had you known all the challenges that you would have faced, would you have entered into it? Now I would say definitely because we're talking about kids, but maybe yours isn't adopting kids, maybe it's something else. Maybe you're like, this is just too hard. It's too hard. It's too challenging. It's not what I expected. And so he had sent them. They're doing good. They're obeying. That's a very important point to make. They are obeying the Lord. And then it says he saw them. Mind you, this is the same day. Okay? Feeding of the 5,000. It starts at the evening, at the end of the day. It continues into the night. So remember I mentioned the tired part? Do you guys always make the best decisions when you're super tired? Who loves not sleeping? Anybody? Okay, so we all like sleeping in this room, right? It's important. Physical things are important too, right? Let's not be hyper spiritual here. So we like to sleep. So you imagining they're tired. Then, if you cover like a diameter of about, or the breadth of about 8 miles from the Sea of Galilee, if they're about in the middle, they've rowed 3 to 4 miles, okay? And they are just rowing. And have you ever felt like you're rowing and you're moving nowhere? You're rowing and moving nowhere. And every time you row, every push, it's not only like physical, like, oh man, my back, but it's actually emotional. And even it starts to get into the spiritual, where we would maybe not utter it, but in our minds, because of our grumbling or complaining or whatever, and God knows those things, man, does the Lord really know what he's doing? Is he really good? Like, he's good at working miracles for other people, but is he going to work miracles in my life and in my situation right now? And so this resonates because I think we can, in some way or another, we have, we are, or we will experience something of a similar effect. Maybe none of us are going to be rowing across the Sea of Galilee anytime soon, but that feeling, tired, emotionally drained. And here's the last kicker. Anyone ever here feel lonely? Alone. I'm doing exactly what the Lord told me to do, and we're out here alone in the middle of the sea. It's like what the Israelites cried out, right, when they were freed from Egypt. Did he bring us out here to die? Right? Is that really why the Lord set us free, to bring us out here to die? And we kind of laugh about it now, but I think if we're being really honest, we can relate to those experiences. And so he saw them. And do you ever have any of those, like, if I was the Lord, this is what I would do, which is really silly, but I think about it sometimes I read the word. It's like, oh yeah, you see someone struggling, you got to run to meet the need, right? Some of you guys are wired that way. We got to fix it. You're fixers. But what does Jesus do? There's like this kind of like, I see this pause in between. He sees them, acknowledges that they're straining, and whatever time it was that he started, it says about 3 a.m., the fourth watch of the night. Okay, long day, right? This is what this chapter is about. Feeding of the 5,000 happens at the end of the day. Now we're at 3 a.m. He didn't run to them, he walked. There's, I think, a peace in seeing that. There's a peace in seeing that Jesus isn't like, how did this happen? I didn't understand this was going to happen. I'm super disappointed, and I'm super surprised that this storm came. I'm super surprised at them struggling. No. You walk like that gingerly because you know exactly what's going on. And Jesus knew exactly what was going on. That they were exhausted. That they seemed worse off than perhaps in that moment than when they had first started following Jesus. And time had passed, and he starts to walk to them. So the three things we've covered so far that I just want to review is, he sent them, okay? He saw them, he saw their struggles, and he went to them, okay? He went to them. The third one, I want to hit on this. I like people when they're at their best. That's our natural fleshly thing. But how about liking people when they're at their worst? Whether it is tragedy and grief, death, struggle, sickness, sin. Like that's our God. That's my Jesus. That's when he shows himself strong, when I'm at my weakest. That's the time when he comes, when we got nothing left in the tank, right? Every part of identity. You got fishermen in that boat. Like if I'm there and I'm like Matthew the tax collector, I'm like, dude, come on, fishermen, you guys should be knowing what you're doing. And then I'm arguing with Simon the Zealot, but it's just like this whole weird, like even the personalities that must have been on that boat. But their commonality is that they were each struggling, and he came in their struggle. Verse 49 tells us that he spoke. 49 and 50 tells us then as he comes to them, he speaks. Now, as he's coming to them, they're not like, yeah, Jesus. They're like afraid. Because Jesus is coming in a way that in their humanity and in their minds and in their limitations, they didn't expect him to. Like, this is something different. And it wasn't like, this is odd. It was fear. Like, there's a ghost walking towards us on the sea. Could it get any worse than how we already are feeling? We got exhaustion. We got alone. We got emotionally drained. We got a long day. And here comes a ghost to top it off. But no, it's in the Matthew account, I love it, because as he's walking out there, he's like, hey, Peter, cruise on out, man. Come and walk towards me. It's that account. And here I think they're understanding a little bit more about Jesus, that you can't really just put him in this box. That just because he did it one way the other time and did another way the next time, that he's not going to do it the same this time. We can understand that he loves, and that doesn't change. We can understand that he's faithful. But show me in the Gospels, did Jesus ever have the same methodology in the way he healed and touched people? Is it like, okay, let me spit on the ground and do it to everybody, like just being a mud-slinging Jesus? No. He touched people in different ways. He knew what would minister to them. He knew the deepest, darkest part of what they needed to be whole. He said to the woman with the flow of blood, daughter, a social outcast, not only physically. Why? Who touched me? And then he says to her, daughter. Jesus knew he touched him, but it was to acknowledge her in front of everybody else. Daughter, relationship. People are important to me. And it's in these things, in our suffering, that I think we often get a new experience of the Lord. And so he came, they're afraid, they're not full of faith, and he spoke something. In verse 50, 49 and 50, it says there what he spoke. It says, be of good cheer, or some translations may say, take courage. Then the next thing is, it is I. And then the next thing is, do not be afraid. So I want you to notice something here. It's really important. Because most of us, if maybe we're getting a little impatient with our friends and people around us, we'd be like, why the heck are you afraid right now? Come on, get over it. Suck it up. But notice what Jesus says. Be of good cheer. Be of good courage. Okay? Be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid. Okay? What is bookending courage and don't be afraid? I'm here. I'm present. It's me. Don't let that pass. Take courage only happens because of what's in the middle. And don't be afraid wasn't a lack of acknowledgement by Jesus, like, come on, guys, like, don't be afraid. The only reason how you can get out of this fear is because I'm here. And the crazy thing is that Jesus is still, he did it in my life and is still doing it because my story's still being written. And he can do it in yours. He does it in yours. What did he leave them when he ascended to heaven? Right? What did he leave them with? He left them with the Spirit. And he left them with the promise of his presence. Okay? Super important. Because no matter where we go in life, I've served the Lord in different places, been on the field for about 10 years now. Like, the Jesus thing doesn't change. You might move between counties or move jobs or relationships, but the Jesus thing, if you're a follower of Jesus, like, that doesn't change. Like, he's present. He's present. And that's the only component. That is the essential thing. He is the essential to take courage, be of good cheer, and don't be afraid. Without it, I totally get it. I totally get what the disciples might be going through. But when did he do it? When did he say those words? You see, this is the pattern of Jesus. It's his pattern. He, in the book of Acts, went to Paul while he's in prison, and you don't say, don't be afraid to people who are like, I'm super happy right now. You say, don't be afraid to people who are tempted to be afraid, or who are in the middle of being gripped by fear. He says to Paul, don't be afraid. He says here, don't be afraid. He said to the disciples after he was risen from the dead, as they're kind of like locked up in this room, and if you kind of did a 21st century version of that story, he would have the fridge in front of the door and it's like backed up, right? Holding back, because they're super afraid. All the disciples are hidden like, what's going to happen to us next? We're going to be the next ones hanging on one of those rugged crosses. All of our hopes, everything dashed. And what does he say when they're at their lowest point? Peace, I'm here. You see the pattern? And this would be completely obsolete if this was a teacher and a miracle worker or a prophet 2,000 years ago who was buried and died and was buried. But it's super relevant for us today. It's super relevant for me today because he died and was buried and he rose again. So if he's alive and he was present with people in their lowest point, he's alive and present with you guys in whatever season you're in. He's not just, okay, I'm only going to be present. I'm like a doctor. I'm only going to be present when you're sick. No, he's present. He's present. And I think it's also important is, yes, his presence, but connected to that is his word. As we go through struggles, we ask a lot of advice, which is totally cool. Like we're created for relationship, right? We ask this person and we look up that article and we do research and all of those things. But it's really important that God's voice is louder. It's really, we could take those things into consideration, but the only thing that's going to make God's voice louder is by opening this, right? In the Epistle to the Romans, Paul says that faith comes by hearing and hearing by the word of God. It's like, oh yeah, I want strong faith, but like I don't ever want to read my Bible. No, this is how. Because you know what this says? When I read it and you and I read it, it makes God bigger. And it puts kind of everything else in kind of like perspective. It doesn't make it easy, but it makes God bigger. What in this world, in this human realm, science, all of medicine, all of these things, it makes God bigger. It always kind of wants to like make God smaller. Yeah, but. There's no yeah, but about God in here. You guys just studied through Daniel, right? The book of Daniel with the church. There's that verse that says, I believe it's chapter 11, where it says, those who know their God will be strong and carry out many great exploits. But how do we know the Lord? In the 21st century, how do I know God? Yes, he's present, but how do I know? Like, how do I know promises and things about him? It's here. It's here. And so often, even in my own walk, I'll make a confession. So often I look to the well of other things. I can look or be tempted to look into the well of other things to provide what only Jesus can. And I could justify it as good, reasonable, logical. But this is the way I'm going to be built up when he comes and speaks. And I love it. He does all of these things. He sends them. He sees them. He comes to them. He speaks to them. And then the fifth thing is he got in the boat. When they're at their worst, when they have nothing like good of themselves to be like, look, Jesus, I have these things off you. They have nothing. He's like, I'm going to go to your mess and I'm going to get in with you. It's one thing to be like present and Jesus, because there's that weird part that says, and he would have passed them by, to say like, I'm going to speak a word, be of good courage, I'm here, don't be afraid, and then he walks to the other side. And they're like, okay, wait. But it says when he got in the boat, the wind ceased. Jesus, get in my boat. Get in my boat, Lord. I remember, like it was yesterday, there was a point, we're about to get real, when I was in a hotel in the capital doing paperwork, and we got like our final no, like this isn't going to happen in your adoption. And it wasn't final. It was final on human terms, but not in, thank God it wasn't final. And I sat in the room and I was like complaining to the Lord. I was just like, I'm done. And I remember I had been like listening to this song that a friend had written he had no idea I was listening to his song. He was a worship leader, and he wrote it for a mutual friend who had passed away. And I won't sing it, but I will tell you some of the lyrics. It says, the chorus goes something like this. It's like, when I've given up on hoping, Jesus, you have never given up on me. Even in my wandering and my weakness, when my fears seem to never cease, you're still there. The whole crux of so many aspects, even when I'm faithless, which Paul attests to in 2 Timothy. It's all of these things that, like, even in all of my ugly parts, like, you're what I need. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, in the room. I've been listening to that for a while, but I'm like, I just, like, stomping my feet, like, no, I don't want anything. Well, a friend emails me, and who emails me? The friend who wrote the song. And he's like, hey, man, I don't know why you're just on my heart. I'm just going to play a few worship songs for you. And he plays worship songs. He plays 3 songs. He gets to the 3rd song. What song does he play? I'm like bawling. High schoolers, I am like bawling. Like, and seriously, it's like, he used that to remind me that, like, he knows. He sees. He sees. And he didn't make this guarantee, like, I'm going to make this adoption go through. He just said, I see it. I see it. And he got in the boat that night. And it kind of just sustained. The wind stopped for a minute. Did we have other things? Of course. But it's just a reminder that, like, I'm here. So he saw them. He sent them. He saw them. He came to them. He spoke to them. He got in the boat with them. And then there's that weird verse at the end, and I think we'll kind of wrap up there. Am I doing on time? Okay, I'm good. Where he says, let's read verse 52 again. For they had not understood about the loaves, the miracle that just happened, because their heart was hardened. Okay? They had not understood. Now, one thing I've learned too in this season, or I'm learning, is that understanding doesn't happen here. Understanding in the biblical context happens here. Not here, here. So, give you an example. Old Testament. The reign of the amazing King David is done. Kind of ended really bad. Not on good terms, not super great, but he loved the Lord, right? Came back. Anyways, Solomon's there. It's big shoes to fill, big sandals to fill. He's probably in his 30s, 20s or 30s, ruling over this massive kingdom. And the Lord has this thing where he says, Solomon, what do you want me to do for you? Name it. Are you thinking about what you would say? And Solomon says, Lord, that you would give me a understanding heart, or some translations say a wise and understanding heart to govern your people. And then God gave him wealth. He gave him peace. He gave him wisdom here, right? He's like the smartest dude on the planet. People would like come to just hear him talk about leaves and bugs and animals. I don't know. But like seriously, he was a smart guy. But he asked for a wise and understanding heart. And I think that's super important because they didn't understand in their heart what Jesus had just done. Maybe it was, there's a couple things. Like maybe it was that, yeah, Jesus is a miracle worker, but is he really Lord? Like, have I had that personal experience? Again, going back to what I've said earlier, like maybe you're like, yeah, God does stuff for people, and yeah, if people have a crutch, he helps them. but I don't really have that experience. And I'm not talking about the tickles on the back. Maybe you've had that. But really just like I've seen Jesus or God demonstrate something in my life that's real, that's personal. And in these disciples, after they were afraid, when they thought he was a ghost and he spoke to them and all those things, in other accounts of this same story, it says they worshiped him. So like he wasn't just that miracle worker for other people or even just a great miracle worker or a super moral guy or an amazing teacher. Like this is the Lord. This is the Lord. And so we can experience the blessings and miracles of God all around us and never actually really see them. Like, how much money do you pay for breath in your lungs? Anybody? It's like an auction right now. What about the beating of your heart? Who makes it happen? You make it happen? It's like the Lord. He numbers our days, but man, He provides that out of His grace. It's not because we've earned it or because we're going to return Him with really good stuff and we're going to be really good people. But it's His grace at work. So they hadn't considered it. They hadn't had that experience. They experienced a miracle, but it hadn't reached their heart. And I don't know what is going on in your life this morning, but the word there for understanding is to consider. It can be translated from the Greek into the word consider. So have you considered? You're looking at the story the chapter that you're presently in. Maybe you've lived in the past chapters that you've never really got into the present. Your past chapter and your past narrative has dictated every single fear and decision you've made. Maybe you're like, dude, these things are going really, really well. But the point is here, I think, and I want to leave with this, is consider. Consider in your heart what God's doing. Consider in your heart what He's done. And I can't do that for you, and your best friend can't do that for you, and your spouse can't do that for you, and your kids can't do that for you. And you know what? Even if you say, that's ridiculous, I'm not going to consider that, His love for you doesn't change. He loves you the same on your best day as on your worst. So it doesn't change because, I didn't consider or I did consider. His faithfulness doesn't change. His obedience to go to the cross for you didn't change. He doesn't say, I take it back. It doesn't change. So many things in our life are constantly in flux and changing, but here's the thing, guys, He doesn't change. So if we just consider, reflect. I had a friend that said, when you look back on the rear view mirror of your life, you see God's sovereignty at work. You don't realize it in the moment, but when you look back in your life, you see, man, God's been faithful. He protected me from that. Or I remember Him calling me and I didn't come. And I got into some junk that maybe I shouldn't have. But the longer you live, the longer you follow Jesus, the longer you look back and you're like, dude, God's been faithful. So what am I going to do and what am I going to consider for the present? And what I'm actually teaching and preaching to you guys, seriously, it's right here for myself. We have so many unknowns. Sometimes we're like, what are we doing? Oh yeah, you guys are serving the Lord on the mission field. You guys know what you're... No, we really kind of don't always know what we're doing. But the same truth that's here is the same truth for you and I, no matter where we're at. Let's just consider it. Let's consider that He's present. Let's consider that if He got into boats with people 2,000 years ago, His disciples, that He'll still do that with His disciples today. He sees it, guys. He knows whatever you're going through. He knows whatever mountaintop you're in. And He's preparing you, because every season, prepares for the next one. He'll prepare you for that next season. He'll give you those blessings, those seasons, and then he gives you the hard times. But the thing that doesn't change is him. He's always faithful, and he always loves you guys. And if that's all you get out of this message, then praise God.